In 2020, journalist Robert Kolker came out with a book called Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family. It was about a big family, 12, count 'em, 12 kids. They were well-educated, white, musical and athletic. But this was no reboot of Cheaper by the Dozen, because as young adults, 6 of the brothers, a half dozen, developed schizophrenia. The story was sensational, with scenes of immolation, violence, sexual abuse, suicide, and more heartache than one family could be expected to metabolize in 1,000 years. The book became a bestseller. Charlize Theron optioned the rights for a movie. Discovery made a documentary, which eventually aired on HBO. And for a while, the family got a lot of attention, as did schizophrenia. But now, years have passed. The movie is on hold. The documentary has come and gone. The only constant in this odyssey, the family, soldiers on. Their lives make for an incredible saga that would be perfect for brain stories, except for one thing. It has already been told, and exceptionally well at that. So that's why we're going to depart from the usual. Instead of a carefully woven narrative, this will be a straight-up interview with one of the kids who was on the front lines for the whole thing, Lindsay Roush. She is the youngest in the family, and she opens the very first chapter of the book, 7 years old, tying up her oldest brother, Donald, with the idea that she was going to set him on fire because of how disruptive and embarrassing he was. But when she became an adult, Lindsay was the one who assumed care for her brothers after both parents died, taking over for Donald, Matthew, and Peter, the 3 with schizophrenia who were still living at that point. She was the one who helped them navigate the incredibly difficult world of mental illness, and navigate the even more difficult world of getting care, and perhaps a few crumbs of respect. That is, she was a loving sister and a mental health advocate. So in this episode, Lindsay reveals parts of the family's story that were left out of the book, and offers a closing chapter for a family that owes its fame to schizophrenia. Coming up on Brain Stories, a show about one of the most bewildering mysteries of human experience, mental illness, told by people who live with it and those who support them. I'm your host, Frank Kosa. Lindsay, let's dive right in. The book about your family opens with a scene of you as a kid, leading your older brother Donald up into the woods with a plan to tie him up and set him on fire. What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I think I was a young child, probably 6 or 8 years old. All I knew was that his brain disorder was disrupting my life and our family's life. It was hard to live with on a day in and day out basis, with his gesticulating and his talking to himself and his pacing and his just general overall bugging all of us, for lack of a better word. He was annoying. He was always sick because of the medications. We'd come home from school and he'd be, I don't know what serious mental illness and nakedness have together, but I often find him naked. He moved the furniture all out of the house. He just was very, very disruptive because of his mental illness. And it was confusing to me as a kid. And I thought, oh, well, I can just get rid of him. And that was, I think, my objective. And he went along with it, knowing, I was a small child, and he just thought it was sort of play. And I think I was playing too, but also had a little bit of seriousness in there in my heart, because I just wanted it to go away. The anger that was fueling me, of course, wasn't directly at him. It was at schizophrenia. I thought if there really was a God in this world, they would have never allowed anyone to have this brain disorder, because it's like somebody kidnapped his mind. And so the kidnapper is really who I was angry with.
Were you actually even aware of that as a 7-year-old? I mean, that's sort of remarkable that you might even think that.
Oh, yeah. That was a big thing. I think growing up Catholic, a big thing was, why would God have, if there was a God, he's too empathetic to have created this brain disorder. So I was angry at God. I was angry at my friends who didn't have it in their families. I was just angry, period, at everything.
There was a lot to be angry about, because even though you were 6 or 7 years old, Donald wasn't the only brother who was ill.
Yeah, no. I watched 6 brothers between the ages of 2 and 16 years old become affected. I watched each one of them, as I like to say, had their minds kidnapped by this brain disorder. And it was like losing siblings one after another. The person that you knew was no longer that person. My brother Matthew had been my soccer coach, and he was a babysitter to a large extent for me. And he became ill at 18. And so I was 10, 11 years old, and he came home. And there I'd lost another one. And it just seemed like it was one after another after another. It just didn't seem to stop.
I'm just wondering, how painful was that for you?
Oh, it was heart-wrenching. It was devastating. It was, as a little kid, confusing. It shaped our family. It also forced us into a battle that most of us can barely imagine. I mean, we had to find a unique kind of love, a love, that is fierce. Because in order to keep these people in your life, you've got to stay really dedicated to the outcome. And, my parents were who set that example of that love.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's something that sort of comes through in the book, but with all that happens in the book, it's easily lost.
My parents showed us a love that understands that some things cannot be fixed, but must simply be endured. Donald's diagnosis when I was 2 was a turning point, and it changed the trajectory of his life and all of ours. And so as a family, we've spent 60 years navigating a world that completely misunderstands what he was up against and what we as a family were up against. So, you have to develop a love that has a surprising sense of humor to it, and know that this is an individual who also loves you fully. I mean, I think that's where often people forget, is that just because somebody suffers from serious mental illness doesn't mean they don't have a great depth of emotion. I've always said that in some ways, knowing somebody that has serious mental illness gives you a greater capacity for love, because only in knowing the depth of pain can you also know the heights of joy.
And there was a documentary done on the family entitled Six Schizophrenic Brothers, in which you hope to capture the family's pain and the joy, and ultimately help people understand mental illness. How did you think that came out?
I think as a family, we chose to do it, to participate in it, after somebody from Discovery reached out to us who had a son that was affected and wanted to raise awareness. So, the pitch to us was, because this book is so popular right now, published in 13 languages around the world, on the top 10 or 20 of the best books lists in every newspaper in every city, we thought, well, let's use this opportunity to continue to raise awareness. And I think because it was Discovery, we felt like there would be an educational component to it. And we were disappointed. It was more sensationalized, like we really, really wanted it not to be. And I think that was embarrassing, actually. As a family, what our hopes were for it, and then it not having been, was embarrassing to us, because we really thought it was going to bring some education around anosognosia in particular.
So what is anosognosia? What does it actually refer to in terms of your brothers?
The best way I describe it to folks is it's a secondary brain condition in addition to a serious mental illness, whether it's bipolar or schizophrenia or Alzheimer's, where the person with the brain disorder does not have the ability to recognize they have a brain disorder. And I think Alzheimer's is probably the best example, because if you have a grandparent with Alzheimer's, you're not angry at them for not realizing they have Alzheimer's. And I think that that's where people are missing the boat with a large percentage of those affected by schizophrenia and severe bipolar, is that they do not have the ability, their brain cannot self-reflect and see that they have a problem. And so that in and of itself would drive such enormous compassion. Imagine having a brain disorder that you don't think you have, that you don't understand that you have. I mean, how confusing is that when somebody says you need to keep taking medication for something that you don't have?
When you were growing up, you didn't know anything about anosognosia, and in fact, the term only existed applying to people with actual brain damage. It wasn't in the mental illness world at all. Just really briefly, how did you find out about that?
I had a friend who reached out to me after the book was published who worked for TED Talk in Australia. And he had watched Dr. Amador's piece on anosognosia, the TED Talk, which is fantastic. I highly recommend. If you have a sibling or a child or family member suffering from serious mental illness who refuses treatment, I highly recommend you watch the TED Talk that Dr. Amador did.
And Dr. Amador is, just so listeners know, it's Amador. And he's actually the subject of another episode that we're doing. But so you reached out to him. He reached out to you. What happened?
Well, I was, again, I'm going to say embarrassed that our family, in all the years that we had been seeking treatment and involved in the research community around schizophrenia, no one had ever mentioned that term to my parents or to any of us. So none of us knew that this was a secondary brain disorder that was affecting our brothers that prevented them from seeking care. And I think had my parents known that, the amount of conflict in our home would have been reduced substantially, because my parents would be trying to force care upon them. And maybe there would have been a gentler, kinder approach to helping them get care. And so it was embarrassing, I think, that anosognosia was not in Hidden Valley Road, and in large part why we chose to do the discovery piece was in hopes of bringing awareness to anosognosia. And then that series put anosognosia on full display in all three of my brothers that were in the piece, and then never explained it. That's where it missed the mark completely. The whole point of our doing it was to raise awareness around anosognosia, and it just didn't. You know, as one of them said to me, train wrecks sell seats. A term like anosognosia, people are going to turn the TV off because it's impossible to pronounce.
How'd you feel about hearing your family's experience enormous pain and devastation described as a, quote, train wreck?
Yeah, that's pretty unkind, because it wasn't. I mean, along with the tragedy of serious mental illness affecting 6 of my siblings, the tremendous amount of joy in our household. You know, everyone played classical music and went to the opera and the ballet and the symphony and played tennis. And I mean, there was so much joy in our home that to boil it down to a train wreck is flat out inaccurate. It's not like somebody with serious mental illness is chronically in crisis. I mean, yes, with 6 of them, there was a lot of crises, but we were often doing things together as a family that were full of joy. I mean, I look back on my brothers and their love for falconry and our family ski trips, and that all was just completely missing. And I think the dichotomy of having that much tragedy and also having that much joy in a family, to me, was the whole point of the story. I mean, to show other families that the love and care and joy that can come with having brothers that are so severely disabled is really, really important. I think that, you know, writing it off as a train wreck is, I just keep thinking it's just inaccurate.
After the book was published in 2020, you set up a trust for your brothers called the Galvin Family Trust. What is that? And why'd you set it up?
The Galvin Family Trust is a disability trust. And this is something I feel really strongly that other families that have somebody affected by serious mental illness set up a disability trust. It is a trust that is for those that are unwell to get some basic needs met that will not jeopardize their benefits. Our family did not make a penny from the book or the HBO series, and that's why we set it up, because those most affected by the disorder did not see any benefits. And so it's just, you know, we just ask for donations, and it's just little stuff like shoes, boots. It can't cover housing or medical care.
Why?
Because the state provides that for those affected. Well, it used to. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. I mean, my brother Matthew lives in a 10 by 10, maybe 15 by 15 square foot room with another grown man with serious mental illness, and no one else will take him because he's affected by schizophrenia. He didn't grow up that way. He grew up in a lovely home with lovely things and good food and tennis and hockey and, so he knows the difference. He's keenly aware of the conditions under which he's forced to live. And these small little things, someone just taking him out for a cup of coffee, makes such a difference in his life. It makes him feel like someone out there gives a damn.
I'm going to break in here because if you're listening, you're already someone who gives a damn. The Galvin family shared their story so we can all have a better understanding of schizophrenia. They weren't paid for it. They just did it because they believed it would help. The six brothers living with schizophrenia got poor mental health care for decades, yet they participated in just about any study they were asked to in order to help researchers unravel the mystery of mental illness. Now Matthew is the only brother of the six still living. And the only way he can get a new jacket or go out for a cup of coffee without risking his entire housing and medical benefits is from the trust. That's why I'm asking you to give to the Galvin Family Trust. I understand. You're in the middle of a podcast, and I hope you're finding it so good you don't want to stop for anything. But the holidays are approaching. It's a time of year for giving. And all I'm asking is if you're making any donations this season, add the Galvin Family Trust to your list. And I'm not just asking you. I've done it myself. It's one of the ways I put what I believe into what I do. All you have to do is go to galvinfamilytrust.org. You can find a link in the episode description or on our website. Every penny will go to Matthew Galvin. And if you make a donation by the end of the year, there's a bonus. You'll get access to exclusive clips from this interview that aren't in the episode. It's a menu of short clips called 7 More Insights from Lindsay. We're not going to solve mental illness today, but there is something you can do. Your donation to the Galvin Family Trust is a powerful way to say, you give a damn. There's one more thing I want to let you know of. Something special about the episode we just did on Gwen and borderline personality disorder. If you like that story, check out a podcast called Superfeeler, because you can learn even more about Gwen and others living with BPD. You can hear their odysseys of self-discovery, hope, and the power of living with such intense emotions. Superfeeler is hosted by Lori Edmondson, who did a terrific interview with Gwen, and also hosts a free peer support group. Find Superfeeler anywhere you get your podcasts. Now back to the interview with Lindsay. There was one other thing that I want to touch on that it comes up in the story and the documentary as well, and that is the whole issue of sexual abuse. That was a part of your family story. What is the connection to mental illness or lack thereof?
They're two completely different things. They are in no way connected. Sexual abuse is throughout society, regardless of there being mental illness. There's sexual abuse in every walk of life. Most families, 1 out of every 3 women is affected. 1 out of every 5 men is affected. And it has nothing to do with serious mental illness. My older brothers were sexually abused by priests. And as a result, then one of my older brothers sexually abused the younger children in our family. So I know there's a lot of information out there about how the courage it takes for somebody to stand up in a family and say, stop, uncle, whoever, or cousin, whoever, or father, whoever, or your soccer coach, or your whoever it is. It's people that have access to children that have been abused themselves that go on to abuse. And it's no relationship to serious mental illness.
In other interviews you've done, you mentioned that PTSD came up for you, as well as other members of your family. How did PTSD factor into all of this?
Well, I think that what many people don't realize, particularly practitioners, I would say, is that having serious mental illness in your family doesn't just affect the person who has it. It affects all those around them that have to endure and watch this happen to their loved one. You love this person. This is your brother, your sister, your child. And it's traumatizing to observe. And you're waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time. Even with your son, I think one of the big PTSDs for all of us who were unaffected in my family was waiting to become affected, being on pins and needles, waiting to wake up one day and be hearing voices.
Did you worry about that yourself?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there is any of my siblings that didn't. I think everybody was very, very concerned.
Was there ever a point where you felt like, oh my gosh, it's happening to me?
Yeah, one time in college when I tried psilocybin and I wanted to hit the off switch, and there was no off switch. And I thought I was going to wake up in Pueblo, which is where the state mental hospital is. So never did that again. That was very terrifying.
Was there any point where you had a realization of like, oh, it's not going to happen to me?
I think in my mid to late 20s, because I was in such intensive therapy in Boulder, sometimes twice a week, I think that my therapist was able to help me come to the realization that it wasn't going to happen to me.
How did that feel?
Enormous relief. Enormous relief. And I see that that's where my son is now in his life, because he was absolutely terrified of becoming schizophrenic, and it was disabling to him.
Tell me about that.
My kids knew there's a genetic component, and I think that just as they grew older and became teenagers, that they started to become aware of that. We actually went and had testing done, and they didn't carry, in our family, it's the SHANK2 gene, which is the autism gene, that they believe is the marker in our family for schizophrenia. And neither of my children had the marker. And they were early teens. Like, I think my son was 10 years old. But I guess he missed that memo. He was so stressed about developing schizophrenia that he didn't have capacity for anything else. And, he started saying, well, if I'm going to become schizophrenic, what the hell? I don't need to do my homework, and I don't need to go to school, and I can just start self-medicating now, which, as we all know, is a potential trigger. So it was a battle from his age 15 until he was 20. And now he's 25. And I think he recognizes that he's not a candidate, that he has dodged the bullet. But that fear was very, very real for him and really prevented him from excelling in his teen years.
I want to turn the conversation to your brother, Donald, who recently passed away. You and your siblings all came together to hold a memorial service for him. After so much life lived with the illness and for him so much pain, how was it for your family to bid him a final goodbye?
It was really lovely. We went up to Wilkerson Pass, which is a mountain pass between Colorado Springs and Buena Vista. And my brother, Michael, who's a classical guitarist, played the guitar, and that was beautiful. And I read a eulogy that I had written for him. And my brother Mark shared, my brother Mark and I both got quotes out of Lord of the Rings, which was sort of funny. We almost read the same thing. And we all just shared fond memories. He would always show up at Christmas and with beautiful gifts for my children. Thomas the Train, wooden trains. And so, I'm sorry he didn't make it to his 80th, because that would have been in July. And we were all also able to celebrate his life prior to being affected. I don't remember him prior to being diagnosed with schizophrenia, but my older brothers do. And they were able to talk at length about him being the big brother, about him taking them places and doing things with them, and taking them rock climbing and hiking and fishing and, all the things that big brothers do. And then those of us that only knew him when he was affected by schizophrenia were able to talk about his gentle demeanor, how sweet and kind and soft he was, letting a 6-year-old take him to the top of the hill and tie him up, because that's what he was playing with me. We were able to reflect on his kind way of being.
Is there a memory that you recall from the service that you had or someone else had, or something you said in the eulogy that captured that?
Well, I can read a little bit of it. When I was 3 years old, my earliest memories of Donald were of him coming home from college, divorced and defeated, and so deeply attached to all he had lost and would never regain. He spent the next 60 years finding detachment, and in his way, his own quiet within his delusions. I believe he had made peace with himself and his life. The chaos and confusion are gone. Today, there are no more fears, no more paranoid thoughts, no more battles. There is only peace.
Where are you now in this whole long story of your family?
I think acceptance is such a key part of any family's story. Accepting that you can't fix it. accepting that you're going to be affected by it forever. I think that releasing the shame and guilt really gives the greatest amount of perspective on it, to realize that it's nobody's fault, and forgiving all those in your family who couldn't help more, that weren't there more. And that forgiveness, I mean, you're forgiving the disease itself, and you're no longer angry at the illness, much less the individual, which I think consumed most of us. Most of our growing up was that we were so angry at the individual, when in reality, we were angry at the illness. And I wish for those in my family and in other families that still find such shame and guilt around this, that they can be set free of it. That would be my hope for people, is that the stigma and the shame and the guilt, that they can find a way to let that go and love these individuals for who they are, and forgive themselves for not dealing with it perfectly.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, share it with your friends, your family, or perfect strangers. Your recommendation is a superpower. Use it and become part of changing the narrative around serious mental illness. Coming up on the next episode of Brain Stories, Ronald Brownstein was an audacious conductor fresh out of Juilliard who became the youngest and probably least experienced conductor to win one of the biggest competitions in the world. His career was a done deal, a rocket to the top, except for one thing that may have fueled his genius, but came at devastating cost. Don't miss this episode. It'll be out January 8th. Or make it easy on yourself and just follow us, especially because we may drop a surprise before the year is over. If you want to get the website for the Galvin Family Trust or a link to the book Hidden Valley Road, look in the episode description. It's also on our website, brainstoriesproductions.com, with lots of other information. If you want to share a story you know about mental illness, email us at brainstoriesproductions@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to the team that made this story possible. Our associate producer and editor was Kate Ruscosa. Bowen Wong was the episode producer. Karen Given got the day off on this episode, but she's our incredible story editor. Original music came from our composer, Paul Swartzel. The show is executive produced by Frank Kosa and Janet Yang. As always, thanks to our advisors and all our supporters. This show is a copyright of Brain Stories Productions and the Sam Obey Corporation. The use of this episode, or any of its content in any form or way for artificial intelligence, its development or training, is copyright infringement and expressly prohibited without prior written agreement. Happy holidays all, and see you January the 8th, or maybe December 30th. Keep your ears out.